Sound. I'd like to just put that out on the floor. I realize we're running a little later than we expected to be, but I hope there can be some discussion. And if there are any questions, comments, stones you want to throw, I'm here to proceed. And we have somebody going around with a microphone for anybody who wants to speak. And stunned you in the side. I was warned about this in the waiting room. Yes, sir.
I have a question. It's not related to specific to the Nantucket Sound issue, though. You said. I have a question that's not specifically related to the Nantucket Sound issue. But you talked about the book you wrote, Places in Town, and you said it talks about what you think, not what the National Park Service thinks, which infers there's a difference of thinking. So would you just highlight a few of the differences of what you think this designation means versus what the official NPS line is on that?
I promise my wife I wouldn't insult the National Park Service. I don't think the National Park Service has had creative thought about this subject in about 25 years. And I am not at all sure that people who are making decisions about eligibility at the National Register really understand what traditional intellectual properties are all about. But I hope I'm surprised by the next determination they make. The problem is that the National Register is staffed by academic historians, archaeologists, basically people who have gotten degrees in those professional fields. And they tend to want to nitpick things, and they tend to want to split hairs. And the fundamental lesson that we ought to be, the government ought to pay attention to people. The government ought to talk to and listen to people. Is not something that I think any government official or any government agency really understands very well. So I don't know that I could point to a specific difference of opinion between the National Register and me at this point. I haven't really seen any evidence of intelligent thought in the National Register lately. Those of you who were involved in the Dune Shacks case here on the Cape are well aware of the strange and highly politicized decisions that the keeper of the National Register can come up with. I don't know if that helps at all.
In one of the newspaper stories that was published this week, you said that it was a no-brainer as far as designating or recognizing Nantucket Sound as a traditional cultural property. Do you think the National Park Service is going to do the same way?
Well, the National Park Service think it's a no-brainer that Nantucket Sound is eligible for the register as a traditional cultural property. I don't know. I think it's probably a political call.
Excuse me. Does Congress get involved in this at all? Do they have to rubber stamp the designation on the register?
I'm sorry.
Does Congress, U.S. Congress, get involved in this? Do they have to rubber stamp the National Register designations? Is there money involved they have to approve?
Well, Congress, it's not uncommon for congressmen to ask questions and make strange pronouncements about National Register issues. And this frightens the National Register terribly. In the Mount Shasta case, for example, there was a proposal to put in a ski facility on the upper slopes of Mount Shasta. And the keeper of the National Register duly determined that Mount Shasta was eligible for the register. But when threatened by a single member of Congress, and a member of Congress with almost no power, when threatened with legislation that would somehow make it illegal to determine natural places eligible for the National Register, the keeper very, very quickly backpedaled and decided that only the area above timberline was eligible. That is still being disputed by the tribes in the area. But, yeah, Congress gets involved. There's no formal role for Congress, but Congress does get involved. What Congress ought to do is amend the laws. I mean, I have another book that I just published called Unprotected Heritage that's about how just utterly screwed up the historic preservation laws and the National Environmental Policy Act have become in the last 20 years or so. I think there's an urgent need for some kind of a legislative fix, but I don't see it likely to happen.
I wonder what the process really entails. When I think this is going to be like a producing briefs or history that could go to court and it become a legal and a political battle between the proponents in order to decide what is going to turn out to be.
Well, could it become a political? Well, first off, the National Register eligibility determination process. First off, if an agency and a state historic preservation officer or a tribal historic preservation officer agree that a property is eligible for the National Register, they can simply treat it as eligible without any further ado. That's what happened with the Mushkegauga-Monsetti case in Wisconsin. The agency, in that case the Corps of Engineers, and the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Officer, agreed to treat the property as eligible. That frankly frightened the mining companies sufficiently that they ended up reducing the price on the mine and selling it to the tribe, who solved the whole problem and get a great big powwow. It was nice. But if that doesn't happen, as has not happened here, then the agency submits documentation to the keeper of the National Register, the person in charge of the National Register program in the National Park Service. Anybody else can submit information as well. And the keeper then makes a determination, which supposedly is final. There's no particular process by which that determination is made, except it's usually made within, I think, 45 days, unless they ask for more time or ask for more information, and they not infrequently do that. Now, could it wind up in court? It could wind up in court if there were a procedural flaw. In the case of the Klamath Imperial Mine and the Ketchon Trail of Dreams in the Southern California desert, in that case, the property was determined eligible for the National Register. The agreement couldn't be reached on how to deal with it. The mining company said, well, we'll fix it because we'll put in our mine over here and our tipple heap over here and our processing plant over here, and we'll run everything on overhead cables so we won't mess up any of these archaeological sites. And the tribe said, wait a minute, it's not that these are archaeological sites. This is our sacred landscape. We travel through it in dreams, and you're saying you're going to transform it into an industrial landscape in your dreams, fella. The tribe wouldn't go along with it. The State Historic Preservation Officer wouldn't go along with it. The Advisory Council wouldn't go along with it. Eventually, the Advisory Council commented to the Secretary of the Interior, saying, we think this is going to have such a devastating impact on Quechan spiritual beliefs that you should not issue the permit. The Bureau of Land Management, the Secretary of the Interior at the time, was very willing not to issue the permit, and they didn't issue it. Thereupon, the mining company sued everybody. At that point, California came in and passed legislation saying that you could mine sacred land, but you had to reclaim it in a way that would retain its sanctity, which of course is impossible. At that point, the mining company, which was Canadian, appealed to the international tribunal set up under the North American Free Trade Agreement, saying that the state of California and the U.S. government were illegally impeding their right to free trade. That case remained before the tribunal for about 15 years, I believe. The tribunal took a long time to work with it, took a lot of pleadings from everybody. Interestingly, recognized the Quechan tribe as a sovereign nation, as an intervener, the first time an international body has done that. And eventually found that the mining company didn't have any grounds. So that project was dead. So it sort of all depends on whether anybody can find a procedural law that they can file suit for.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I just had a question. If in this case, Nantucket Sound, where both the tribes and the Mass Historic Commission have agreed that Nantucket Sound is in fact eligible, are there strict criteria for the National Park Service to disagree with that? And what is the precedent for them doing so? In effect, overturning or not deferring to the SHPO and the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers?
Well, first, are there strict criteria? The National Register is bound by its own regulations, its own criteria, but how it applies those criteria and what thought processes it goes through or consultative processes it goes through carrying it out, that's up for grabs. The Park Service can pretty much do it however it wishes to do it. I cannot think of a case in which the Park Service, well, I guess in the Mount Shasta case, the Park Service ended up disagreeing with both the SHPO and the tribes. But it wasn't really about the eligibility of the mountain, it was about the boundaries of the property, which really didn't make a bloody bit of difference to whether the project was going forward or not. And I should say the Forest Service eventually did not let the project go forward. But that disagreement was simply about the boundaries. There have certainly been cases where the National Park Service has not agreed with a state historic preservation officer about eligibility. The classic case being the dune shacks around the Cape. But I can't think of one where they just flat out disagreed with a THPO and an SHPO about eligibility.
So it would be very unusual in this case for the National Park Service not to defer to what's already been ruled.
Yeah, they could very well make a liar of me, but it would be unusual.
Okay, thank you.
I think back to Congress again. We have one senator against one senator for Cape Wind. Looks like the new senator might be for Cape Wind. Is it going to be a problem for the National Park Service?
Been scared to death of political pressure and very, very sensitive to political pressure. And so, yeah, I think it would be a problem.
Hello, and thank you also. And I'd like to thank Chucky Green and also the team in Washington. That was very interesting. And thank you for sharing that with us. I have a couple of just very quick questions. The National Park Service has been asked to make a decision or a determination. Did a written document have to come from Minerals Management or an opinion from Minerals Management to the National Park Service? And would that be accessible to the public?
Okay. Yes. There was a letter. I have not seen the letter, so I understand the letter has gone from Minerals Management Service to the Park Service, and that would certainly be a public document.
The next question I have is, in the event that the National Park Service does not rule properly, and/or the Secretary of the Interior rules against the Wampanoag Indians. Under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is there any type of appeal for the Indians to take that further? And was the legal decisions that you talked about earlier made by the Supreme Court?
Oh, okay. Understand that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is a totally separate statute from the National Historic Preservation Act. They have nothing to do with each other. And so the Wampanoag could seek redress under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, sort of regardless of what happens under the National Historic Preservation Act. It would make sense not to do that until things have sort of played out under the National Historic Preservation Act, but they certainly could take action. Now, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act has been interpreted in fairly wildly different ways by different courts. And though the court that I was talking about in the Oklahoma case was certainly not the Supreme Court, it was not even a circuit court of appeals, it was a district court. And it wasn't a final ruling in a case that went to trial. It was a judgment on a preliminary injunction. So it's not strong precedent. It's just an indicator of how courts may rule in the future. On the other hand, another court, including the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, in another San Francisco Peaks case recently, has held that spraying treated sewage effluent on the top of the San Francisco Peaks to make snow did not encumber the Navajo and other tribes in the area in the practice of their traditional religion. It's an utterly nutty decision, but it was one that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals managed to reach. So the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is by no means a clear shot for a tribe or anybody else. It's simply another avenue that can be pursued.
I just had one more very quick question. In our situation that we have here, we have the person who has been given the right to declare this of historic significance, being the Massachusetts Historic Officer. She made her determination. When she's made that determination, and it's blatantly clear which way she falls on it, and then we have a governor and a Secretary of Environmental Affairs who are almost trying to preempt this process, with the governor going as far as saying that the Indians' religious claims are ridiculous. Is that any type of open violation of any type of known protection that is out there in any of these federal laws?
Well, let me first echo the deal in saying that I think Colonel Simon has shown a great deal of courage and a great deal of integrity in coming down the way she's come down. It does surprise me. I've known her for 30 years before, and she's always been a person of integrity. Understand too that I'm not a lawyer. I am sometimes accused of practicing law without a license, but I am not a lawyer. I just work with the laws. I'm an archaeologist. I work with the laws for 40 years. So I would be very loath to offer an opinion about whether anybody could get after the governor for saying that somebody's religious practices are ridiculous. I kind of doubt there'd be much grounds for legal action, but I'm no expert. Yes, ma'am.
Back to the keeper of the National Register again, and you.
Isn't that a wonderful title?
Yeah.
Keeper, they gave it to him specifically to sort of conjure up the image of somebody up in the tower.
Well, you've answered parts of this question, but I just want to re-clarify it, especially since I was
who was involved in letting people on the dune check issue at Cape Cod National Seashore, where a ethnological study was done and endorsed by 2 experts hired by the National Park Service, who concluded that the dune check growers did constitute traditional associated peoples with traditional cultural property. Wrote a Simon, agreed with that. The National Park Service disagreed. It went to the Keeper of the Register, and the Keeper of the Register denied it. And my question is this, if you know, and I guess I can look at it myself, but once something goes up to that level, may the Keeper of the Register, can anybody add material that goes before the Keeper of the National Register? Can the Keeper of the National Register reach out on his or her own and solicit opinions and comments? And is any of that information legally accessible to people who are disappointed by the decision once it's been made?
Again, the National Park Service pretty much makes up the rules as it goes along with these things. But certainly, if other people can submit information, anybody can submit information, anybody can submit opinions, and all the documents ought to be public documents. All the documents that are produced ought to be public documents. I don't know what grounds the Park Service might have unless, well, okay, sometimes material is regarded as secret or kept secret because releasing it could lead to loss or damage of the historic property. You could tempt people to go in and knock up an archaeological site, tear down the rock art or something. Or because it may generate an invasion of privacy, or releasing the information could impede a traditional religious group in the practice of its religion. All those can be reasons for keeping information confidential by the Park Service. Absent one of those justifications, then the information ought to be public, then the freedom of information. Did that address the question?
I think what I'm hearing is that anybody can write and submit from that point on,
Yes.
and the Keeper can contact people on his or her own as they see fit.
Yes.
In fact, in an unbiased way or a biased way, and there's not much you can do about it. What's the review of that designation? Just going to Congress, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing further. There's no court
Well,
that would deal with it.
in the case of the dune shacks, where the federal agency involved was the National Park Service, asking itself, basically, gee, Keeper, whose salary we pay, you don't think these old dune shacks are eligible for the National Register as a traditional cultural property, do you? I think there's a pretty clear question about the objectivity with which the Keeper made her determination. Whether that's anything that's actionable in court, I don't know. Again, that goes way beyond my pay grade as a lawyer. Yes, sir. In fact.
I'm curious what the effects of eligibility are on current uses of an area.
The effects of eligibility on current uses. As far as I can see, they would be none. You want to give me an example of a current use?
I would easily say fishing.
Okay, fishing. Is fishing federally regulated?
Yes, and state regulated.
The question would be, is there some kind of federal action involved with fishing in Nantucket Sound that would have to take into account the requirements of Section 106? I suppose if you had a federal agency regulating fish take out in Nantucket Sound. And there was some argument that could be made about the number of fish you took out in Nantucket Sound having some effect on its historic, spiritual, cultural value. Then, yeah, there could be some implications, but it strikes me as a very long bow to draw. If somebody came in and proposed to build a bridge across Nantucket Sound with federal funding, then that would require Section 106 review. But it's important to understand that it would require Section 106 review right now. It doesn't matter if the sound is determined eligible, because you remember, a property is eligible if it meets the criteria, not if it's determined to meet the criteria. So right now, I would say there is clearly a no-brainer question out there about the eligibility of Nantucket Sound. And if somebody were going to propose to build a bridge across it, they'd have to address that in the 106 process, no matter what determination the people makes. Yes, sir.
Let's see if I can do this without the microphone. Senator King, thank you for your time. And try and get to your first question up there about Nantucket Sound, cultural property. Is there a time span that the Wampanoags would have had to have made people aware that the sound was important to them religiously? This process has been going on for, I guess, approximately 8 years. Has that been out there? Maybe Chucky or Bettina could help on that.
I can say that the record is pretty clear. The tribes were making their point several years ago. I can't speak to 8 or 10 or 20 to 50 years ago, but at least in the early 2000s, there's documented, there are letters from the tribes saying this is a traditional cultural property of ours. This is a culturally important place to us. We are the people of the Eastern Life. Saying all the things that you heard from Chucky and Bettina earlier. The tribes have not been silent about this. What happened, and I was monitoring the situation at the time, Minerals Management Service, as I understand it, having gotten these allegations about the sanctity of the sound, called up the National Register, and they talked to a staff member of the National Register, and apparently, I mean, we don't have a transcript of the conversation, but it seems like they said, hey, Nantucket Sound couldn't be eligible for the National Register, could it? And the guy at the register seems to have said, well, no, because it's big, and it's wet, and it's sort of open to the ocean. And you see there's this language in this National Register Bulletin that says that a place like that isn't a site, and so therefore it's not going to be eligible. Doesn't make any sense, but the Minerals Management Service happily took that information and put it in their environmental documents saying we talked to the National Register, and a place like Nantucket Sound can't be eligible. That's nutty. I mean, they didn't do anything of the kind. They didn't go through any kind of formal process. They called the guy up and got an informal opinion. It was a stupid thing for MMS to do, for their own purposes. It was dumb planning, because they were simply not, they're throwing away a piece of information and tempting, creating a situation where there couldn't help but be an 11th hour conflict. And that's what they now have.
Great, thank you, sir.
You know, the thing you got to remember about these laws, and really NEPA and Section 106, all of the environmental impact laws, is they're look before you leave laws. The idea is to find out what your problems are going to be, what your impacts are going to be, before you take the federal action. And what agencies, unfortunately, too often do is they find ways to sort of bury the issues in procedural fine print, and as a result, they sometimes get away with it, but other times they get caught. And when they get caught, you get an 11th hour crisis, as we seem to have developing here. It's not the fault fault of the people. It's agencies not thinking through, not getting the information, not wanting to look before they leave, preferring to leave and hope they don't get caught in mid-stride and shot down. Yes, sir.
What we heard was, well, the EIS is 1,000 pages thick. It's got to be good. I mean, it's got to be something.
Yeah, we've come to measure goodness by weight and thickness. If you've got something the size of the Manhattan phone book, it's got to be a good document. That's what my latest book is about, or almost latest book is about, is just the fact that in particularly the last 10 years, but it's really been going on longer than that, we've let the NEPA and Section 106 processes get so corrupted that, A, nobody can understand them. They're too complex. The processes are too complex for any reasonably educated human being to understand. And they're just too easy to dodge. It really badly, there's a serious need for rethinking the whole system. But that's not what we're here to do tonight.
What are the benefits of being formally listed on the National Register if the property might be eligible to get grants from the National Park Service?
I'm 67 years old.
I'd have to be. What are the benefits for a property being formally listed on the National Register that it might be eligible for Park Service grants in the future? Can you think of any TCPs that have received a Park Service grant? Or maybe cultural preservation activities?
Yes, there are some. Actually, every now and then the Park Service has money to give to grants for fixing up or maintaining or preserving historic properties. And when they have those grants, sometimes some of them are going to traditional cultural properties. So that is one benefit of actually listing something on the register, because you don't qualify for a Park Service grant unless you are actually formally listed on the register. So that's an advantage. Another advantage is if you're a private property owner and you put your property on the National Register and then maintain it in an appropriate manner, you qualify for certain tax benefits. So that's an advantage. There are also states that give grants to National Register for protection of National Register properties. So there are some advantages. What I recommend to people is don't go through the agony of nominating something unless you have a clear roadmap that leads you to some kind of advantage. If you can see some grants out there, if you can see tax benefits, if you can see if there's some local protective process that's triggered by being on the National Register, then sure, by all means, go ahead and do the paperwork. But don't do it just because the Park Service tells you it's a nice thing to do. Yes, sir.
Gary, can you go back one slide? Can you go back one slide? So as far as the process going from here forward, it's with the keeper right now, is that correct?
It's with the keeper. Yeah.
And the keeper will determine if it's eligible for it. Okay. And that might take how long, do you know?
Probably 45 days, unless they come back and want more information. It's a very common strategy for them to ask for more information. When in doubt, ask for a study. And that's what happened with the Dune Shacks. We had study after study after study, and this has been studied to death.
Well, that's not the slide I wanted, but that's okay. I think I remember the slide. The keeper had said that first. And then there was a talking, that's the next step is to convert, is to talk with the tribes. Let's assume that it is eligible. The next step is to talk.
I'm sorry, I'm missing what you're saying.
Okay, let's assume that the keeper said it is eligible.
Okay.
Let's assume that. The next step then would be consultation with the tribes. But it seems like that's going on now, by the way.
Yeah, the keeper determines it's eligible. Then the next step is consultation with tribes and others about what to do. Technically, you first decide whether the agency first decides in consultation with the tribes and everybody else whether there's an adverse effect. If there's an adverse effect, then they consult further about how they can resolve that adverse effect. And whatever the parties agree to, if they agree to something, that's memorialized in a memorandum of agreement, and that then is carried out. If they don't agree, then the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation reviews the case and renders a final comment, which goes to the very top of the agency, in this case, the Secretary of the Interior. And the Secretary of the Interior then has to make the final decision and cannot delegate that responsibility down to the chain of command.
Will they generally go with the comment to the recommendation? Will they generally go with the recommendation of the Advisory Council?
Not necessarily. I don't have any figures on how often agencies have gone with the Advisory Council's recommendations and how often they've not. The Advisory Council also doesn't necessarily come down on the side of what we might call preservation. It's the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, not for historic preservation. They can say, oh, we think that wind power is great, you know, put it in wood.
The Secretary has a lot of power at that point.
The Secretary is the one that makes the final call. Okay, I see people jumping ship. I'm not surprised. Thank you very much. One more question. Yes, sir.
Yes, I've seen opinions made by the proponent side that one of the reasons that this should not be considered eligible is because there are no known boundaries on the what is considered the site. But when you have in this area, basically to the south we have Nantucket and Tuckernuck, which are both named after obvious Indian folklore and history. You have Chappaquiddick to the west. You have Pompanesett Island to the north. You have Monomoy Island to the right, and then you have probably, you know, the town of Cotuit. These are all traditional Indian areas that were named and existed long before it, and actually surround the site of the Nantucket Sound. Earlier you were saying that there had been disputes with boundaries on different sites. Wouldn't that be considered kind of a boundary or a legitimate boundary?
Well, I think it probably should be, but my opinion, and $6.50 will buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. The keeper, you know, somebody I think you asked earlier about cases where the keeper and I had disagreements. The keeper is really hung up on boundaries. I mean, they love boundaries. They insist on boundaries. They want boundaries just absolutely nailed down, even if it makes no sense. And this is a case where it makes no sense. I mean, who cares what the boundaries are of Nantucket Sound? Let's say that Wampanoag said it's as far, all the way out to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Who cares? Cape Wind is in the middle of Nantucket Sound. You know where it is. It's going to have an effect. It doesn't matter where you set the boundaries of the property. But the National Register gets very hung up on boundaries, and they love to argue about boundaries. It's a nice academic fine point that they can nitpick to death, whether it makes any difference in a management sense or not. So, to me, it seems like Nantucket Sound is more obviously bounded than a lot of places I've seen. It's more easily bounded than, say, Mount Shasta, where you've got an argument about where exactly is the base of the mountain. Well, it doesn't matter to the tribes either. The tribes say it's a spirit. You know, we look at it from a distance. It's the whole thing. But the keeper can get very hung up on boundaries. So I agree with you that Nantucket Sound is pretty reasonably bounded, and I don't think it makes any difference anyhow. But I could imagine the keeper or others spending an awful lot of time picking bits of it. I saw a case in Georgia where the project was at the north end of the river valley that was the sort of origin landscape for the Muscogee Creek. And the National Park Service got all involved arguing about boundaries at the other end of the river valley. It was so far away from the project that it had no bearing on the project's effects whatever. But they spent months and a great deal of time and money, or the agency's money, Federal Highway Administration's money, studying the boundaries far away from the site of the project. It was a really silly thing. It's the kind of thing that they relate to. Thank you very much.